Thanks, everyone. This is just delightful. Having a kind of quite stressful week, and then something like this happens. You just think, yes, this is why we do what we do. So, yeah, we're absolutely delighted to have Professor Anne Stiles visiting us here at Loughborough University. So I'm just going to do a little introduction to Anne before her talk. So Anne Stiles is Professor of English and Coordinator of the Medical Humanities Interdisciplinary Minor at St. Louis University, and I hope I'm saying that correct. Yes, I've been told it's Lewis. I've been getting it wrong for years. I blame the musical. So she's the author of children's literature and the rise of mind cure, positive thinking and pseudoscience at the fin de siècle, and that was from Cambridge in 2020, and popular fiction and brain science in the late 19th century, which was also Cambridge in 2012. And she is the editor of Neurology and Literature, 1866 to 1920, and that's Palgrave in 2007. And one of the reasons that I invited Anne is because we now have a Health Humanities Hub in the School of Social Sciences and Humanities, and we're very interested in continuing to develop our health humanities and medical humanities research, across the school, and particularly in English. So Anne has held long-term grants from the Institute of Research in the Humanities at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, the Huntington Library, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And her current monograph is Scientific Afterlives, The Unexpected Legacies of Mistaken Theories, 1860 to 1930, which is also under contract with Cambridge. This explores the consequences of mistaken, misunderstood, and misapplied discoveries in atomic physics circa 1900, and focuses on literature by Marie Corelli, who we will be hearing about today, and H.G. Wells, and the religious writings of Helena Blavatsky. So we look forward to hearing about Corelli, to hearing about Marie Curie, and the wonders of radium. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you so much to Sarah for inviting me here. I feel just really lucky to be here and not in the United States right now. It's definitely an improvement. And so, yeah, I also just wanted to say a little bit about the origins of this talk. I mean, I will talk about that later too, but it started out as material at the Stratford-upon-Avon Centenary Conference for Marie Corelli that was held in 2024. I know some of you might have gone to that or at least popped in for a little bit. So a longer version of this material will appear in Joe Turner and Eleanor Dobson's edited collection, Marie Corelli, New Perspectives on Cultural Currency, Popular Fiction in the Literary Marketplace, which is forthcoming from Edinburgh University Press in late 2026. And this chapter also forms part of a larger project that Sarah mentioned about mistaken theories in atomic physics from the late 19th century until about 1930 that were taken up by literary and religious writers of the day. The tentative title of this book is, of course, Scientific Afterlives, The Unexpected Legacies of Mistaken Theories from 1860 to 1930. That title will probably change several times, but in it, I ask, what happens to scientific theories that are proven wrong or go out of fashion? Do they disappear from textbooks and scientific literature, leaving no trace? Or might they have robust cultural afterlives that their inventors never anticipated? Scientific Afterlives explores the consequences of mistaken, misunderstood, or misapplied discoveries in atomic physics in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Chapter 1 begins with William Thomson, Lord Kelvin's theory of the vortex atom, proposed in 1867 and abandoned by most respectable scientists, including Lord Kelvin, in 1898. Only to resurface in writings by occultists like Theosophical founder Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and her protege Annie Besant in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So chapter 2 and 3, meanwhile, turns to early 20th century atomic physics and radioactivity. After Marie and Pierre Curie discovered radium in 1898, scientific, religious, and literary authors, including best-selling novelists such as Marie Curie, Corelli, H.G. Wells, Bram Stoker, and H. Rider Haggard, suggested that the radioactive element was safe, healthful, and possessed divine significance. And to be fair, they were following the lead of early scientists on this who also did not fully understand the dangers of this element until much later. These misunderstandings had disastrous consequences for human health and the natural environment, from the deaths of radium watch-dial painters in the early 20th century to the long-term effects of radioactive contamination on the natural environment. The role played by popular literary and religious writing in disseminating mistaken beliefs about radiation is an understudied topic that feels timely now, too timely, when the doomsday clock is closer to midnight than ever before. A study of scientific misunderstandings is also relevant to the the current political environment in my home country, the United States, where vaccine deniers, flat earthers, and those who still reject evolutionary theory are actively shaping public policy to disastrous effect. So, anyway, today's talk comes from the last chapter of that book, which was probably the first to be written, as these things sometimes happen, on Marie Corelli's misunderstandings of radium in the first decades of the 20th century, as expressed in her fiction and personal correspondence. And when I gave this talk to my department, I had to go into a long explanation of who Marie Corelli was. And I know most of you probably know this, but I'm going to go into some details just because there may be an outlier here who does not know who Marie Corelli was. I'm not really sure how, how well known she is in Britain, maybe more so than in the US. But I've been writing about Corelli for almost 20 years on and off, which is just wild. And I don't know why I can't really seem to get away from her. I just keep coming back. But I think I might be, somewhere in the top 20 world experts on Corelli by now, but definitely not the first place person. I think that would be Joe, probably. And I really wish Joe Turner were here today because I really do think that she knows more about Marie Corelli than anyone else on the planet. And her monograph about Corelli is forthcoming later this year, so that's really exciting. Um, okay, so now a little bit, and I apologize if you already know this, about Marie Corelli. So she was far and away the best-selling author of the 1890s and early 20th century. She was the second most famous woman in the world in her heyday while Queen Victoria was alive. And then when Queen Victoria died, for a little while, she might have been the most famous. The Sorrows of Satan from 1895 is widely considered to be the first modern bestseller. Personal details: she lived with her life companion Bertha Biver in Stratford-upon-Avon. She was pretty reclusive. She avoided the press, and she didn't like photographs of herself to be published. So, as I imagine, she would have wished, I've included this rather idealized painting of her instead of a photograph. And anyway, she continued to write best-selling novels well into the 20th century, but she never she never attained the critical acclaim she sought. So I've tried to think of a modern analog for Corelli, and I just don't think I'm quite there yet, but maybe she could be like someone like a Daniel Steele figure, or a Michael Crichton, someone who sells a lot of copies, but they're probably not writing the most literary fiction. So maybe that's a comparison you could make. And if Joe were here, I would say, is that what you think, Joe? But she is not. So just a little bit of history of me and Marie Corelli. I told you this already. I went to the Marie Corelli Centenary Conference commemorating 100 years since her death, organized by Joe and Ellie Dobson. And this was held in her house in Stratford-upon-Avon, Mason Croft, which is now owned by Birmingham University. But if you've been kind of obsessed with an author for a long time and you get to go to their house, there's something really special about that. I've never had that experience really before. So at the conference, I instantly made 10 new best friends because it was like, oh, these are the other people in the world who cared enough to come this far and, talk about Marie Corelli, who really care about Marie Corelli. And this picture is of some plaster work that is above their mantelpiece. And as you can see, it's Marie Corelli's initials and then Bertha Biber's initials. And underneath it says Love Conquers in Latin. So there's long been this mystery of were they or weren't they like a couple, or were they just like friends who lived together or something, which seems kind of silly, but a lot of biographies of Corelli were written in the 70s and, even before, when there wasn't a lot of talk of or understanding of lesbianism, let's say. I mean, maybe they thought she was an old maid. But I think we solved this mystery because there was a love letter that was found, and this was really, really exciting. We also saw Corelli's Venetian gondola and the Folly Tower where she wrote her novels. This is the Folly Tower, and me looking very pleased with myself for being there. It was very cool. And here is the gondola, the dream, and she and Bertha they actually had an imported Venetian gondolier, and he would, row them down the River Avon. So, and this is the love letter, which was very exciting. So this was written by Marie Corelli to Bertha Biber in 1920 and recently rediscovered. And I won't read it to you. It's not like explicit or anything. It's just a nice romantic love letter. And you can tell that there was definitely a lot of affection there. So we feel like we've kind of solved the mystery of, yes, they were like a couple. And it kind of seems silly that it was a mystery. It's just that like I said, some of the critical approaches to her were written very long ago. So anyway, but the letter I was most interested in, actually, I think someone found it for me. It may have been Joe, but this was from Corelli to the psychical researcher, Sir Oliver Lodge, who was also a physicist, written in 1907. And she says to him, "I hope I have to thank you personally for sending me your catechism, Earth and Heaven, which I have read carefully in its every line." And this was his a book about Christian spiritualism and reconciling that with science that he had written. And she says, "It is very clear and beautiful. I cannot help noting how much it is in consistency with some of the theories put forth in my first book, A Romance of Two Worlds, published before I had attained my 17th year." Lies. She was 33. What puzzled my readers at the time of publication of my book in 1886 was the word electric. The millions seemed to think it had to do with electric light. I was not allowed then to use the right word, which expressed radioactivity, for the brilliant friend and tutor whom I introduced in Romance of Two Worlds as Heliobas was then perfectly sure of radium and actually possessed it in a small tube. This was long before the Curies made their announcement of its discovery to the scientific world, and moreover, much that I was told about it and shown concerning it when I was the merest girl has been given to me since in documentary form, which I shall be able to publish before very long. But at that particular time of which I speak, when I put together the romance as a sort of prophetic vision of what was bound to come, I was forbidden to write quite as openly as I could have wished. It is to me quite wonderful how your Earth and Heaven embraces much of what my Heliobas helped me to study, and though he passed onward only a short while ago, I still keep up active work and correspondence with his community of scholars, of who I am proud to be the only woman admitted. So this letter was very intriguing to me because it raises a lot of tantalizing questions. Um, So why did Corelli claim to have known about radium over a decade before its discovery by Marie and Pierre Curie? Was the character Heliobas a mystic sage who appears in her 1886 novel, A Romance of Two Worlds, based on a real person? Did she or her alleged mentor ever possess a small tube of radium? And was Corelli truly engaged in the sort of Kabbalistic, mystical scientific study she describes here? Given Corelli's penchant for fabricating information, one should take her assertions with a grain of salt. Joe Turner has shown how Corelli's creative self-fashioning helped disguise her working-class origins, while Ellie Dobson describes how Corelli claimed to have been the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian princess to bolster her authority as an amateur Egyptologist. So not everything she says can be taken as fact. But despite its fabulations, the letter does contain elements of truth. It shows that Corelli's interest in radium began years before she wrote her 1911 novel, The Life Everlasting, her first work of fiction to discuss radioactivity. The letter to Lodge from 1907 also hints at Corelli's fascination with Maria Sklodowska Curie, pictured at right, a pioneering scientist who was nearly always the only woman in the circles in which she moved. Curie's discovery of radioactivity, a term she coined, earned her a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1903, which she shared with her husband Pierre and Henri Becquerel. Curie would later win a Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1911 for her discovery of radium and polonium. Curie was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize in any field and remains to this day the only woman to win two Nobel Prizes. Her life story was also compelling due to its hardships, including, quote, her epic struggle as a poor girl from Poland, her battle with the scientific establishment, and her struggle to isolate enough radium for it to be measured, in the words of historian Lucy Santos. As the best-selling writer of her day who rose from Cockney origins to unprecedented fame and financial success, Corelli may have identified with Curie. She was understandably drawn to a female contemporary who wielded such unprecedented power and accomplishment in the overwhelmingly male realms of physics and chemistry, and perhaps she sought some of Curie's reflected luster for her own work. Corelli even borrowed elements of Curie's biography in her later novels. The heroines of The Young Diana and The Secret Power, published in 1918 and 1921, respectively, each take up scientific research, only to find themselves pitted against evil male scientists who seek power rather than the betterment of humanity. These heroines at times resemble Curie and even consciously emulate her. And if Jo were here, she had offered to bring her own first editions of these novels. She has quite the private collection, but well, unfortunately, that will have to wait for another time. Um, so the remainder of this talk will discuss Corelli's interest in Curie and her discovery, radium, as shown in her later fiction, especially The Life Everlasting, The Young Diana, and The Secret Power. These works demonstrate her gradual evolution from an unqualified embrace of radioactivity to a growing, if imperfect, understanding of its dangers, including the possibility that it could be weaponized on a large scale. Corelli's shift from optimism to ambivalence parallels a gradual change in attitudes towards radiation among the British public during these decades. While journalism at the beginning of the 20th century emphasized radium's wondrous, even supernatural powers and its cancer-curing potential, the harmful effects of radiation on the human body were more widely reported in the 1920s and thereafter. In The Life Everlasting, Corelli first incorporated radium into her distinctive electric creed of Christianity. And what this was, the creed first surfaced in Corelli's initial introductory novel, A Romance of Two Worlds, in 1886, and evolved into a distinctive faith that was the basis of a small church in the United States. In this creed, light, heat, and electricity are equated with God's love and imbued with divine powers. In books written after 1910, Corelli substituted radium for electricity as a conduit to the divine and associated the element with alchemy and perpetual motion. In The Life Everlasting, for instance, it presents the newly discovered element as a miraculous cure-all and fountain of youth with great spiritual significance, in keeping with much of the radium propaganda of the early 20th century. And by this point, people already knew that radium could help decrease the size of tumors and things like that. So they thought if it could do that, it must just be healthy overall. And only people who had worked with it extensively knew otherwise. So it was thought to be kind of a health tonic. The unnamed narrator of The Life Everlasting, who appears to be the same narrator of The Romance of Two Worlds at a later period in life, learns to master her soul's internal radioactivity at a monastery run by a disciple of Heliobas named Aselcion. At a mysterious chateau on the Biscayan coast, the narrator undergoes a series of increasingly difficult spiritual challenges to gain the secrets of eternal life, youth, and love. Despite being the only woman to attempt these challenges, she succeeds brilliantly, learning to stave off aging and death by directing the exhaustless supply of radium within herself to revivify her bodily cells. She also reunites with her dual flame, Raphael Santoris, an Egyptian sage and fellow disciple of Aselcion. Notably, it has taken these star-crossed lovers many reincarnations and thousands of years to finally achieve spiritual union and radioactive mastery of their surroundings. At the novel's conclusion, these twin souls sail off into a perfect sunset aboard Santoris's yacht, the Dream, powered by a mysterious form of electricity. And intriguingly, of course, the Dream was also the name of Corelli's gondola. So there's a little overlap there. And you also see hints of theosophy, I think, in the idea of reincarnation. Corelli was kind of a dabbler in many new religious movements, but maybe not a joiner in any of them. So scientifically and otherwise, much changed in the 6 years between the appearance of the life everlasting and the serialization of Corelli's The Young Diana in Hearst's and Nash's simultaneously in 1917 and 1918. And The Young Diana, I believe, was the first Corelli novel to be serialized in both the US and the UK. And anyway, by that time, though, the First World War had slowed down progress on research on radioactivity considerably, especially in war-torn countries on the continent. So if you wanted to collaborate, for instance, with France or Germany, it was a bit harder because those countries had undergone a lot of damage. So when The Young Diana appeared serially and later in book form in 1918, radioactivity was not quite the hot topic it had been a few years earlier, and research on the subject would take several more years to reach pre-war levels. Corelli's own opinions on radioactivity, marriage, and women's rights had changed as well. Impressed by women's wartime contributions, Corelli recanted her formerly conservative opinions on women's suffrage and enrolled herself in fervid support of the vote for women. Corelli's late-in-life turn to first-wave feminism is evident throughout The Young Diana, whose eponymous heroine becomes a devoted student of science. Like The Life Everlasting, The Young Diana portrays radium as a potent health tonic with divine significance. But The Young Diana also points to the very real dangers of this powerful substance in the wrong hands. Further, it suggests that endless youth, health, and immortality, seemingly promised by radium, might not truly be desirable. So Corelli's 40-something protagonist, Diana May, embodies the anxieties of the single or superfluous British woman after the First World War, whose marital prospects were blighted by the wartime deaths of young men, and who were bombarded by ads for radium-laced cosmetics, promising youth and beauty. So here are just some pictures of some of those. So you see here radioactive toothpaste. Great stuff. Radioactive lipstick, radioactive face powder, and there were tons and tons of these products, even, jock straps, like all kinds of things that were supposedly radioactive. Thankfully for the average consumer, they were mostly frauds. Radium was too expensive to include, but there are some exceptions to that rule where people were actually like ingesting radium. So at the beginning of the novel, Diana is a rapidly aging spinster who lives with her parents and serves as their housekeeper. She is seen by others as, quote, a woman for whom apparently the world had no use, end quote. Diana's many fine qualities, such as her keen intelligence, mastery of music and foreign languages, and self-taught scientific acumen, are overlooked by those who see her as a useless encumbrance on her aging parents, or even a valueless commodity, in Corelli's words. So, with little to lose, Diana answers a job ad from a scientist in Geneva seeking the assistance and cooperation of a courageous and determined woman of mature years with a fair knowledge of modern science who is not afraid to take risks. This sounds like a bad idea, but anyway, this leads to her employment by Russian scientist Dr. Fyodor Dmitrievich, who retains her as his personal secretary and his guinea pig for a series of dangerous experiments with radioactivity. He tells Diana that I need you as the vivisector needs the animal he experiments upon. For my purpose, you are not a woman. You are simply an electric battery. Demetrius subjects Diana to an ordeal by fire in which she is suspended for 4 days under a revolving wheel of fire and over a pool of water containing, quote, sufficient radium to make me 10 times a millionaire, as Demetrius boasts. Though both Demetrius and Diana are aware that the experiment might kill her, and probably would have if it took place in real life, Diana emerges from this trial as a ravishingly beautiful, immortal goddess who is young with a youth that shall not change, alive with a life that shall not die. So far, Diana's transformation seems in keeping with the life everlasting, where radium keeps aging and death at bay. But Diana is very different from the questing protagonist of Corelli's earlier novel, whose spiritual journey concludes in romantic bliss. The new young Diana is unable to feel the true love she once craved, despite being lionized by rich, eligible suitors. She tells Demetrius that she has lost sympathy with humanity and now feels greater kinship with non-human nature. Quote, this beauty, this youth which you have created in me, are not human. They are a portion of the air and the sunlight, of the natural elements. They make my body buoyant, my spirit restless. I long for some means to lift myself altogether from the gross earth, away from heavy and cloddish humanity, for whom I have not a remnant of sympathy. End quote. So, Diana's affinity with sunlight makes sense because radium was often dubbed liquid sunshine in the early 20th century. But Diana's heightened appreciation of natural beauty in landscapes, flowers, water, mountains, sunshine, etc., which might read elsewhere like expressions of conventional Victorian femininity, are here ominous signs that she is no longer entirely human. As the novel progresses, Diana's transformation shades from a fairy tale into a Frankensteinian nightmare, a fact underlined by Dr. Demetrius's residence in Geneva and the novel's many allusions to Lord Byron and his circle. Like Mary Shelley's hapless Victor Frankenstein, Demetrius belatedly realizes the danger his creation poses, exclaiming that Diana's maddening beauty might slay votaries as with lightning. She also lacks pity for those whom her indifference might destroy, he says. And by this time, of course, he's already madly in love with her, but she can't return his feelings because she's an immortal goddess. So Demetrius's predictions seemingly come true as Diana returns to England and breaks hearts right and left. For a time, she plans to wreak revenge on the ex-fiancé who abandoned her for a younger woman 20 years earlier. While she eventually changes her mind and spares her former lover, the episode reminds us how easily Diana herself might become a weapon of mass destruction. Like Frankenstein's creature, she rebels against her creator and becomes something neither of them could have previously imagined, a monster who combines the social and sexual powers of virgin and femme fatale, in the words of Annette Federico. Though Diana loses her sympathy for human beings following Demetrius's experiments, the reader is nonetheless encouraged to retain sympathy for her. When Diana decides not to avenge herself on her ex-fiancé, for instance, she advances to a higher plane of existence in Corelli's Electric Creed. But the novel's ending is not a happy one. Despite being one of the loveliest women in the world, Diana, quote, lives for the most part the life of a student and recluse, end quote. She admits only a few men of learning and science to her fashionable Parisian abode, refusing to take part in high society and increasingly shunning society altogether. She is even more alone than she was when she lived as an aging spinster with her parents, and she is doomed to stay that way since she can neither age nor die. Diana may not find her happy ending or her twin soul, but she does model a more positive, feminine type of science that could serve as an antidote to Dr. Demetrius's callous experiments. Early in the novel, Diana's suffragette friend Sophie Lansing compares her to Madame Curie and gestures towards Curie's relationship with her husband, Pierre, as a companionate marriage of scientific equals. Quote, "Perhaps this man Demetrius is a millionaire and wants a clever woman for his wife, a sort of Marie Curie to help him with his experiments," end quote. But as we have seen, Diana's relationship with Demetrius is neither romantic nor equal. He selfishly uses her as an experimental animal in his quest to achieve mastery over the innumerable secrets of nature. While Demetrius claims that his experiments will benefit humanity, there is no indication that he publishes his findings or bestows the gift of eternal youth, health, and immortality on anyone besides Diana. By contrast, Diana's pursuit of science has been largely through reading and observation rather than experiment. Unlike Demetrius, she recognizes herself as part of nature, not above or outside of it, decreasing the likelihood that she would use her scientific knowledge in destructive ways. And I think somehow I forgot to show you the picture of the first edition of the young Diana, which I really love. So the contrast between male and female scientific practice lies at the heart of Corelli's second to last novel, The Secret Power, which is also the last work to include her electric creed. And one of my colleagues pointed out when I showed this slide that these kind of look like radioactivity, warning radioactivity symbols. I don't know if that's on purpose. I actually don't know when that symbol came about. So in this novel, scientist and wealthy socialite Morgana Royale is determined to use her brilliance and inherited millions to benefit humanity. Unlike Diana, whose scientific knowledge remains passive, Morgana's experiments with radioactivity culminate in the production of a magnificent airship, the White Eagle, which travels safely and noiselessly at the unheard of rate of 250 to 300 miles an hour. Using this airship, Morgana discovers a fabled brazen city whose inhabitants long ago mastered the secrets of eternal youth, health, and beauty, and communicate via a mysterious sound ray. In conversations with friends, Morgana makes no secret of her idolization of Marie Curie or of the scientific community's ingratitude towards this female genius. Marie Curie, for example, has pulled many scientists out of the mud, Morgana says, but they are not grateful enough to acknowledge it. One of the greatest women of the age, she is allowed to remain in comparative obscurity. Morgana adds, "She is one of my heroines in this life." At various points in the novel, Curie's life story serves as both positive and negative object lesson. Several of the novel's subplots concern Morgana's disappointed suitors. Morgana eschews marriage partly because she knows any scientific achievements she might make would be attributed to her husband. As she tells her would-be love interest and fellow scientist, Richard Seaton, they, men, never mentioned Madame Curie without the poor monsieur. She discovered radium and he didn't, but he is always the first mentioned. Whether or not Corelli was aware of it, Curie's status as a married woman in France also rendered her incapable of holding a patent in her own name, her legal identity being subsumed by that of her husband. This may be among the reasons that she and Pierre decided not to patent their discoveries relating to radium, a selfless maneuver that greatly benefited the scientific community and maintained the appearance of equality within their marriage. While this type of sexism might be sufficient reason for Morgana not to marry anyone, Seaton is particularly unsuitable because his scientific experiments are destructive. Morgana relates that he, like all men, wishes to destroy. I, like all women, wish to create. Seaton's, quote, experiments in the condensation of radioactivity and his monomaniacal quest to develop a super weapon overwhelm all other interests, including his romantic feelings for Morgana. His motives for developing this weapon are both selfish and altruistic. He simultaneously wishes to destroy mankind, to attain mastery of the world, and to create a weapon so terrible it will prevent future war. When Seaton accidentally detonates the superweapon near Pasadena, the press reports earthquake in California, terrible loss of life, thousands dead. Among the victims is Seaton himself, whom Morgana rescues from certain death with a secret elixir of her own making. Though Seaton's body survives, his brain never recovers. He remains unresponsive, occasionally uttering the words, "There shall be no more wars. There can be none. I say it. I only. It is my great secret. I am master of the world." Seaton's brain remains disordered, his physician tells Morgana, because he has been playing recklessly with a great natural force, which he has not entirely understood, for some destructive purpose. Seaton resembles Dr. Demetrius, Frankenstein, and Faust in his ruthless quest to harness nature's secrets for the sake of power and personal gain. The selfishness of these male scientist villains contrasts starkly with the benevolent science practiced by Morgana, whose airship and healing elixir are used for the betterment of humanity. Yet, Morgana and her former love interest, Roger Seaton, have more in common than one might suspect. Neither is conventionally religious, though both believe that science offers glimpses of the divine. Both believe that the human race in its current form is too corrupt and backwards to salvage. Morgana states, for instance, that I shall not aid in the continuation of the race. Heaven forbid. The race is too stupid and too miserable to merit continuance. Both Morgana and Seaton hold themselves aloof from love and marriage and share a sense of isolation caused by their differences from humanity. While Seaton physically isolates himself in a rural hut near a Pasadena sanatorium, feigning illness so he can continue his experiments uninterrupted, Morgana continually emphasizes her fae or fairy blood imparted by her Scottish ancestors. She says, "Fae people are magic people. They see what no one else sees. They hear voices that no one else hears, voices that whisper secrets and tell of wonders as yet undiscovered." It is this difference from ordinary humanity that enables Morgana to make her brilliant scientific discoveries. Morgana's greatness, in other words, consists in the fact that she is not fully human, a trait she shares with the young Diana May. In the characters of Roger Seaton and Morgana Royale, one sees Corelli's increasing pessimism about the state of humanity and the ability of science to solve what are essentially problems of human nature: greed, pugnacity, ignorance, and the selfish pursuit of pleasure. While goodness is still possible and radium can be redemptive when placed in the right hands and used with the right motives, the optimism and peace suffusing the life everlasting are conspicuously absent in the secret power. Morgana eventually gives up on humanity and opts to join the new race of denizens of the Brazen City, where the secret of a large and longer life is still available to a chosen few. On her way to this desert sanctuary, Morgana crashes her airship, her greatest invention, calling into question whether her scientific work will endure at all. Robin Halim, one of the few critics to discuss the secret power, notes how Corelli's earlier expansive versions of the Electric Creed that involve astral soul travel through the universe and Romance of Two Worlds, for instance, or the blissful radioactive immortality of the life everlasting, have shrunk to the size of a terrestrial fantasy in the secret power, where the only inhabitants of the Brazen City, or only those inhabitants, can access eternal bliss. Radium, a key component of the Electric Creed, has likewise lost some of its luster since the life everlasting. Though Corelli suggests positive applications of radium in Diana's immortal beauty and Morgana's magnificent airship, she also imagines radioactive weapons deadly enough to destroy humanity, or at least decimate Pasadena. And as a former resident of Pasadena, it really amuses me that she chose that for her target. Like most Britons of her day, Corelli was gradually learning about the dangers of an element and its correlate phenomenon, radioactivity, whose destructive powers would become more obvious less than 10 years after her death in 1924. If she had lived long enough to see the legal battle waged by sick and dying radium dial painters in New Jersey against their employer, a case that made international headlines when it was settled in the workers' favor in 1928, she might have been forced to revise the electric creed yet again. The death of wealthy playboy Evan Byers in 1931, due to excessive consumption of expensive radium tonics, garnered even more press and forced the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to declare radium medicines illegal. Finally, the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 left no room for doubt about the catastrophic effects of radioactivity on the human body, especially when deployed in the form of atomic bombs. But Marie Corelli's contribution to the radioactive imaginary predated these developments and deserves to be studied independently of them. Her works were an influential part of the early 20th century radium craze that evolved with the public's changing taste and scientific understanding. Thank you.